I am now standing beside a hawthorn. Because it's winter, the hawthorn has nearly shed all its leaves, but there are still a couple hanging on. And I've picked up some leaves for you from the ground so that you know what they look like. Now, the hawthorn has many names, and all those names tell us something about it. Let's start with hawthorn. The hawthorn is thorny. Ow! I broke a thorn. So yeah, the hawthorn is a thorny tree. And haw, well, haws is the name of its fruit. Around August, September, October, you might see those little red fruits coming onto the hawthorn. It's also called the white thorn and the maybush, and that is because around the month of May, beautiful white blossoms appear all over the hawthorn. And the hawthorn can grow up to about 15 meters, which is high enough. It's longer than a bus. But most often you'll find them much shorter because they're used a lot for hedges. There's a lot of hawthorn growing all over Ireland, and the birds love eating the hawberries. As for humans, well, the haw is actually edible, but it doesn't taste bad and it doesn't taste that good either. They say that in the past, haws were eaten only when there was no other food available. There is even a saying, and that is the poor man's bread and cheese. And you know what that saying refers to? Well, if in early spring you pick two really young hawthorn leaves and you pick also a hawthorn blossom and you put the blossom between the two leaves, there you have the poor man's bread and cheese. Now, picking a few young leaves, a few blossoms, that's probably as far as it's safe to go with the hawthorn. You don't want to risk cutting a branch or the whole tree, because you might be in danger of angering the fairies. The hawthorn is also called a fairy tree, and there are loads of beliefs and superstitions to do with the fairies. Now, not every hawthorn is a fairy tree. The hawthorns most likely to be fairy trees are the lone hawthorns, the ones that you might find on their own in the middle of a field, or ones that are part of a fairy ring, a fairy circle, so a circle of hawthorns. You don't want to get too close to them, and you don't want to cut any branch from them. There are countless stories of people who have cut branches from those trees or cut the tree itself, and they have fell into ill health, ill fortune, their house burned down, their cattle got sick. And the same stories say that if, for instance, they brought back that branch to the tree, well, their cattle got better, their health got better, and their fortune got better too. And thanks to all those stories, we have a lot of hawthorn here in Ireland. And that is great news for all the birds that like to nest in it, like the robin, the thrush, the wren, or the blackbird. And the hawthorn is also a protective habitat for about 300 species of insects. There is one last thing about the hawthorn. There is a lovely tradition on the 1st of May, the tradition of the maybush, and it's still enacted in some parts of Ireland, even to this day. The tradition goes like this. On the 1st of May, you pick a hawthorn near your house and you decorate it with ribbons, with eggshells, with flowers. And this mere fact of decorating the hawthorn will bring you luck for the following growing season, the following harvest. The following story was told to me by Liz Weir, a fantastic storyteller from County Antrim. Once upon a time, on Rathlin Island in County Antrim, lived a little boy called Tommy. One day, Tommy announced to his mother that he was gonna go out to pick blackberries. His mother knew exactly what he had in mind, and she said, "Oh, when you come back with the blackberries, maybe we can bake a cake together." Tommy, you see, had a very sweet tooth. He clapped his hands and he said, "Oh, Mom, that would be great." And he could already taste the sweetness of the blackberry pie. "Now Tommy, before you go, you need to change." Tommy was wearing his good clothes, which wouldn't do with the thorn and juice from the blackberries. So his mother brought him an old jumper full of holes and a pair of trousers that was raggedy, torn and stained. But that would just be perfect for berry picking. So Tommy changed. And just before he was out the door with his basket, his mother said to him, "Now you have to promise me 2 things, Tommy. One, that you will get home before dark, and the second one, that you will not go by the fairy tree." Tommy promised, and he gave his mother a hug and was off. Now it was quite late in October, and it was the end of the blackberry season. So whenever Tommy got to a blackberry bush, half of the blackberries were either too dry or moldy or so soft that they would crumble under your fingers. But there were still some that were good, and he picked these ones. But it took an awful long time even to fill the bottom of his basket. And to find good blackberries, he had to go further and further and further away from his home. So far that he got to the valley in which grew the lone hawthorn, that fairy tree his mother had warned him about. And it so happened that on the other side of the fairy tree, there were perfect blackberry bushes. Now the blackberries on them were so big, and they were glistening in the sun. Tommy thought, well, what if I don't stop near the fairy tree, but I just pass by it really quickly? And that's exactly what he did. He ran past the fairy tree without stopping, and then, when he got to the blackberry bushes, he continued his harvest. And those blackberries were indeed delicious, perfect, ripe, sweet, and he had his basket filled in no time. Now there was the way back to think about. He would do exactly the same thing, just run past the tree. And off he went. And as he passed the lone hawthorn, he tripped on a stone and fell flat on his face. He just had to take a few seconds to recover from the shock. And when he finally got himself up, he was not by the fairy tree any longer. No. He was in a sort of underground cave. And around him were 100 pairs of little eyes watching him. The fairies had got him. And they were looking at him with a lot of interest. Some were rubbing their chins, others were folding their arms, others were rubbing their hands. What are they going to do with me? Thought Tommy. And then one group of fairies took a big cauldron and started warming water in the cauldron with a fire. And the other fairies just climbed all over Tommy, on his body, and started to undress him. They were taking off his jumper, taking off the buttons of his shirt, putting out his trousers, his socks, everything. Tommy thought, they are going to eat me. And then he saw the same fairies coming back towards him with buckets, brushes, mops, sponges, and they climbed again all over his body and started washing him from head to toe. They were scrubbing his hair, they were scrubbing his back, they were mopping between his toes, they were sponging his legs, they were emptying their little buckets of water all over him, and then covering him in sods, rubbing, scrubbing. Now, Tommy wasn't one that was very fond of washing, and he thought, well, surely I'm too smelly for them to want to eat me like this, and that's why they're washing me. And he also saw that in the cauldron, where the fairies had heated up the water, now were his clothes being washed. And as time passed, and as the fairies were now rubbing smelly oils in his hair, Tommy started to feel a little relaxed and a little sleepy, and he fell asleep. When he woke up again, he saw that all the fairies were busy mending his clothes. Some were darning his socks, Other ones were fixing the holes in his jumper, and other ones were redoing the hem of his trousers. They were doing a very good job, and Tommy got a little bit more hopeful. Well, if they're fixing my clothes, it's not to wear them for themselves. They're too big. So probably they're gonna spare me. And with that, he fell asleep again. When Tommy woke up, this time he was back by the hawthorn tree. But he was different. He smelled nice. His hair was softer than it ever was, and his clothes were so well mended that they looked brand new. And he saw his basket of blackberries that was still there, and only a few had come off. So he picked up his basket, and a little stunned from his whole adventure, he walked home. Now his mother hadn't had a wink of sleep that night. She had been out with the neighbors, crying his name, shouting his name. And when they had found nothing, well, she had gone back home and just cried. Her face was so puffy, and there were still rivers of tears on her face. But when she heard the familiar footsteps, well, she got up, she ran towards Tommy, and she gave him a big, big hug. And then she pulled away. "Tommy, is it you? You look so different." And Tommy said, "Yes, Mom, it's me." And he told his story. And then he said he was really tired and needed to go to bed. So his mother made him a cup of hot chocolate, brought him to bed and singing a lullaby, and he fell asleep. Tommy's mother was puzzled. She had heard many stories in which the fairies would kidnap a boy or a girl and would try to scrub away from them any trace of their previous existence, any trace from this mortal world, from the world above. And if they managed to do that, within 24 hours, that child would be theirs forever. So why did they bring Tommy back? They had obviously scrubbed him spick and span. She could not find any answer to that. And just at that moment, she heard a cry come from Tommy's room. She rushed to it, and she saw her little boy sat in bed, holding his finger. "Mommy, Mommy, it hurts!" His finger was quite red. His mother had a look, and she saw that deep under Tommy's nail, there was a little thorn from a blackberry bush that the fairies had missed. And thanks to that thorn, Tommy had been able to come back. Please meet my friend the oak. Oaks can grow up to 4 meters in height, and they can reach the ripe age of 1,000 years old. Imagine that. The oak is really easy to recognize because of the shape of its leaf that has all those little round lobes on it. And it's easy to recognize fruit, the acorn. Squirrels love them. Now, the oak is one of the native Irish trees. That means that the oak was here on this island before there were even people. The oak is sometimes called the king of the forest. Why is that? Because of the size it can attain, but also because of the properties of its wood. Its wood is incredibly strong and incredibly resistant to water or to insects, and it has been used widely for building, even building cathedrals. You can find oak beams, oak doors in old buildings. It was also used for building boats, and it was used plentifully, abundantly, so much so that the oak population diminished as the boats were being built. And now there is still a trace of the presence of the oak in Ireland, and that trace is in all the place names that contain the Irish word for oak, Doira. You've got Kildare, you've got Derry, and so many other place names that suggests to us that in the past, the oak was abundant and ever-present on the island. But don't worry about its future because of the squirrels. One of the ways that oak trees propagate is through squirrel. Because the squirrels, you see, they love the oaks. And when it's the end of the summer, beginning of the autumn, they start to gather acorns, hide them in special places in the ground. But you know what? They forget 70% of their hiding places. And thanks to their forgetfulness, those acorns that the squirrels have buried can grow into the future oak forest. What else about the oak? In the old days, in the time of the Brehon laws, the oak tree was considered one of the noble trees of Ireland. And because of that, if you were caught chopping an oak tree or even a branch of an oak tree that didn't belong to you, you had to pay a fine. And for just chopping one branch of an oak tree, you had to pay the price of a 1-year-old heifer. One last fact about the oak trees. It's the king of the wood. And for that reason, if you ever met a king and called him an oak, that would be a very good compliment for a king. So remember that, you never know who you might meet. Once upon a time, a long time ago, on the island of Ireland lived a mythical people called the Tuatha Dé Danann. They were the gods and goddesses of Ireland. And among them, there was the god of all gods, the Dagda, also called the good god. The Dagda possessed a magical harp called Uathna. This harp was made of oak and decorated with gold and precious stones. But that wasn't the most special thing about that harp. The harp could play the 3 noble strains of music: the laughing strain, the crying strain, and the sleepy strain. But it would only play if the Dagda touched it, and no one else. No matter how much of a good harper you were, if you were not the Dagda, the harp would not play. As well as playing music, the harp could change the weather. It could change the order of the seasons, and it could change the hearts and minds of men, women, and children. The Dagda brought his harp nearly everywhere with him. He used it to give courage to his soldiers before a battle, and he used it to soothe their hearts after one. Until one day, the Dagda's harp was stolen. The Dagda and the Tuatha Dé Danann were in the middle of a battle with their enemies, the Fomorians. The Fomorians lived in the little islands all around Ireland, and they were always at war with the Tuatha Dé Danann for one reason or other. And that particular time, while the battle was taking place, a little group of Fomorians decided that they would try and steal the Dagda's harp. Sure, the Dagda was busy fighting, and so this little group of people went into his house, got the harp, and stole it away. They brought it to a deserted castle, where they waited for the rest of their troops to join them. Now it turned out that the rest of the battle didn't go too well for the Fomorians. No, the Tuatha Dé Danann were victorious, and to celebrate their victory, some of them said, "Dagda, play us something on your harp." So Dagda went looking for his harp, but it was nowhere to be found. He was furious and immediately set out to find it. He looked here and he looked there, and eventually he heard some feasting, joyous sounds coming from an old abandoned castle. The Fomorians were in there, celebrating not their victory, but the fact that they had got their hands on the Dagda's harp. They were so busy celebrating that they didn't notice when the Dagda stuck his head through the hallway, and the Dagda immediately spotted his harp on the wall. The four Morians had tried to play it, but without any success. The Dagda then called to his harp, saying the magic words, "Come summer, come winter, from bags and harps and pipes. Come summer, come winter, from bags and harps and pipes." At that, the harp started to tremble, and soon it lifted off in the air, traveled through the length of the whole banquet hall, and ended up in the Dagda's hands. Well, at that stage, the four Morians had noticed the Dagda's presence, and they were all standing up with their weapons at the ready to try and get the harp back. But the Dagda stroked his harp gently and played the crying strain. At that, the four Morians crumbled onto their chairs and started to weep. Some were weeping in their hands, some were weeping in their cloaks, some were weeping on each other's shoulders. They were crying from some very, very old sadness, for a toy that broke when they were a child, for a dog that died, for a night where their mother forgot to kiss them goodnight. They cried also for all the men they had killed in battle and for all their friends they had lost. Their eyes were so full of tears, they could not see the Dagda anymore. The Dagda smiled, and he played the laughing tune. Oh, well, the four Morians, they wiped off their tears, and all of a sudden they smiled, and they were laughing, and they were embracing each other, starting to sing some songs. Some were even dancing. And with the gentle tremor of the laughter in their bodies, well, their bodies relaxed, and whatever weapons or shields they were holding just naturally fell to the ground. The Dagda smiled again, and he played his last tune, the sleepy tune. Oh, the four Morians sat back on their seat, closed their eyes, and fell into a deep, deep slumber. So they did not notice when the Dagda started to walk back, still playing his harp, still playing the sleepy tune, and he walked back and back and back until he made it home safely with Uethna. From that day onwards, the Dagda made sure that his harp could not be stolen from him any longer. And even when the time came for the Tuatha, these magical people of gods and goddesses, to disappear from the surface of the earth, but to hide in the underworld and become, as we know them now, the fairies of Ireland. They still had their harp with them, and they're still playing it from time to time and playing tricks with the weather and with the seasons. Hi everybody, thank you so much for joining our live stream today. We hope you've enjoyed the stories.
Just to say thanks to everyone for tuning in. Sorry about the technical issues a little earlier on. If you'd like to join us, we'll be going live again at around 1 p.m. and you're more than welcome to come along. Thanks very much. See you then.